Hi everyone, it's Lauren, and today I'm going to be talking you through the books that I read in the month of July. Now, I don't know about you, but I found July so demotivating as a month, as a whole, because it was so hot and I just felt like I couldn't focus on anything and I didn't get that much read, or not as much as I normally do, but as we always say, it's quality over quantity. The first thing I read was Die My Love by Ariana Harwitz, and this is published by Charco Press, who specialise in Latin American authors. Harwitz is Argentinian, and this was translated from the Spanish by Sarah Moses. Now, what drew me to this book is that it says on the back that she's very similar to Sylvia Plath and Clarice Lispector, and she kind of is, but not in the way that her writing is very similar, but more in the fact that this is a book where it's not really about the plot. I was about to say not much plot happens. That's a lie. Plot happens in this book, but it's not really about the arc of the story. It's much more about this woman's own internalised fears and issues, and it's about how she reacts with her world. So this is told from the perspective of a young woman who I would presume is Argentinian because she's living in the French countryside and is described as a foreigner, but you don't really know where she's meant to be from. But she has just got married and she's just had a young baby, and essentially this feels like a look into her descent into postnatal depression / even maybe like postnatal psychosis, because she's one of those classic unreliable narrator kind of characters, and it's very much just about how she is experiencing the world, and she swings between violent emotions from kind of feeling very numb and not feeling any love for her husband or child at all, to having these very aggressive and some very sexual, some very violent outbursts, and it's just very interesting the way she's reacting to everybody else. And it's difficult for us to know, because we're hearing it from her, whether she's never loved her husband or never wanted a baby, or if this is just a case of kind of psychosis or depression. And it's very interesting, it's very lyrical, it's very visceral, a lot of the imagery. So it's one of those books where you're really inside this person's head, and it's about their emotions and their feelings and them processing what's going on around them. So if that kind of thing sounds interesting to you, I would really recommend this. I thought it was very beautiful to read, very interesting to read. Next, I picked up something which I didn't actually finish, but I'll talk about it briefly here anyway, and that is A Scanner Darkly by Philip K. Dick. Now, I was lent this by my friend Kate because she has quite a lot of old science fiction-y books. Science fiction-y, I don't know if he really counts as sci-fi, but I was trying to widen my reading horizons a little bit and read some different things, and I just really didn't gel with this book. There was nothing wrong with it, really, just absolutely wasn't for me. This is set in a not too distant dystopian future where most of the population are addicted to a drug called substance D, and this guy is going undercover in order to find out where the source of the drugs is coming from. So he's disguising himself as a drug addict and also being an inspector, but there's some kind of thing that he has to do, put something on his face to make him all blurry, so like the inspectors don't even know that the person who is the mole is him. So he's like reporting on himself. It gets a little bit bizarre, and the reason I ended up putting it down is just because I couldn't gel with any of these characters. They all seemed so dull and so similar, and like, what's the... Okay, yeah, the main man is called Bob. Like, everyone was just very grey and very two-dimensional, and the perspective was just so overwhelmingly male. There's like one woman who is somebody's girlfriend, and I just thought, just don't care. I'm just not invested in this. I don't care about any of these characters. So I just put it down and instead joined along with a read-along that Lauren on the Books and Ollie Bliss were having, and I just poked my nose in and said, can I get involved in this? And they were reading The Paying Guests by Sarah Waters, which was a much better decision for me to read. I really like Sarah Waters' writing, and this was the only book of hers that I hadn't read. And I hadn't read it yet because I had heard from other people that this was their least favourite Sarah Waters, which now, having read it, I find quite bizarre. I don't know why this would be your least favourite, and I really enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I was going to. I guess I did go in with slightly lower expectations, but it just felt like, you know, when you really love an author and you haven't read their work for a while, and when you do pick up another book of theirs, like reading their writing again, it just feels so nice. This is set just after the First World War, and we follow a young woman called Frances and her mother, who have had to let out some rooms in their house because Frances' father has died and they can't pay their rent, and this young married couple move in just above them. And Frances begins to develop feelings for the woman in the relationship, Lillian. So it's about the fallout from that. But typically with Sarah Waters, it's the kind of book where you think you're reading one story and then just something completely out of the blue happens and it ends up being a bit of a rip-roaring kind of mystery, crime, thriller. I don't really know what to call it. It's a little bit of everything. And I really love that about her writing, that she tends to lull you into a false sense of security and then something completely different happens, but you're not really expecting any kind of twist. So I really enjoyed that part of the book. As I said, just loved getting back in with her writing. I would say there's probably a problem with the pacing in it, because it has quite a lot of different emotional turns, which don't seem to be very spread out. And by the end of it, I felt like I'd gone on this whole roller coaster of emotions, but then it seemed to slow down quite a lot for me, because I think Ollie actually really enjoyed the end and found it quite interesting. So it just depends where you are. That would be my one criticism of it. But generally I really enjoyed it. And I finished off July with an absolute belter of a book, oh gosh, which sounds like a horrible pun, which is When I Hit You. This is an account of Meena Kandasamy experience with domestic violence, and I don't know how autobiographical it is, because it almost feels like it couldn't be anything less than the absolute truth that she's writing in here, but I don't want to presume, and I don't know if this is a fictionalised version or more of a kind of extended essay. It kind of straddles the line between the two, and I'd heard so much about this book and I was expecting it to be quite a difficult read, which it is in terms of its subject matter, obviously, because there are elements of this book which are very violent. But I thought it might be quite difficult in terms of the structure, and it's not at all. Her writing is so amazing and she kind of straps you in and you just get tugged along with her narrative. And I read it in like a couple of days. I read it very, very quickly, and she really kind of sucks you in to this world. And it's just so interesting. It's such an interesting portrait of domestic violence within her own marriage, but within the wider patriarchal society of India and everywhere, obviously. But something very specific to her situation, which I found really interesting, was the kind of status of her husband within her own family even. So he's able to take her to a new city where she doesn't speak the language and tell her to get rid of her Facebook, blah, 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 and expect her to be an obedient wife. And kind of, he's able to paint this portrait of her to everybody else, that she's a scold, or she's jealous, or she's a recluse, or, you know, he's really struggling in this new marriage, even to the extent of being on the phone with his in-laws, her own parents. And it's almost like his perception of the marriage in their eyes is equal to hers. I mean, if not more important than hers. And she's under so much pressure to make this marriage work and not leave at the first sign of violence. And she kind of says in there that she can only really leave if she is running away from death, because then that's okay, that she let it get that far and she's running away from actually dying, then that's acceptable. And I love that although there are some very violent parts in it, it's not overly explicit really, and it's much more about the manipulation of power and the control that he has over her within the marriage. And not just the control he has over her, but how wider society has enabled him to enact that control. And it's very interesting to see the conception of this marriage, kind of how she's feeling during it, but then also the fallout of her life and, you know, her wider social circle afterwards. It's so amazingly well written. So that was my July. I hope that you've all been having a really nice summer so far. I know it's a little bit late. I could do the whole, oh, I'm sorry, I haven't uploaded, and there's loads of reasons why I haven't been here, but you don't care about that, like, that's fine. I just was lazy and didn't do any videos because I just could not sit in this room and film, because I would have melted into an actual puddle. So I didn't do that, but videos coming up. Actually, are videos coming up? They're not really, so. But as always, I would love to hear from you if you've read any of these books. I'd love to hear your opinions. I'd like to hear what you've been reading in July and if there's anything that you'd recommend. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye.